Well, behind the scenes of the New York primary today, there were hundreds of voters complaining, maybe even more, about lots of problems that they said occurred at some of the polling places during this state's presidential primary. A lot of this happening in Brooklyn, New York, including registration problems. 125,000 voters in Brooklyn turned out that they weren't even on the rolls. They had been removed for some reason a few months ago. Officials, they say, ran out of affidavit ballots. There was a lack of privacy at the voting booths, incorrect instructions from poll workers, and now the New York City comptroller has announced that he will investigate all this and audit the city's Board of Elections that has been rife with a lot of problems in some of these elections. Senator Bernie Sanders landed in Burlington, Vermont, back home earlier this evening, and he addressed some of these problems, saying that New York State's voting laws keep independents from voting in today's primary.
I remain also concerned that in a state as large as New York, almost 30% of the eligible voters, some 3 million New Yorkers, were unable to vote today because they had registered as independents, not Democrats or Republicans, and that makes no sense to me at all.
So, do the Empire State's voting laws suppress the vote? Let's go to Gianno Caldwell, the principal and founder of Caldwell Strategic Consulting. He's in Los Angeles tonight. And Jehmu Greene is a former president of the Women's Media Center and also a Fox News contributor. Gianno and Jehmu, welcome. Jehmu, let me start with you.
Thank you, Brian.
125,000 people showed up, apparently, and they weren't on the lists. They somehow got purged. Now, you can vote by an affidavit ballot, but then it turns out that in some polling places, they say they ran out of the affidavit ballots. Do you think some of these reported problems that are now being investigated potentially could have cost Senator Sanders some votes today?
Well, it's certainly a hot mess, Eric, and I think it's an opportunity to look at all of the laws that affect how we allow more people to participate in our democracy. Do I think they affected Senator Sanders' chance of winning? No, Hillary clearly won with a resounding vote total. And I don't think it was 125,000 people who showed up who had been purged. I think that was the list that had been purged. And this is not a problem that is only significant to New York. We've had so much attention on voter ID laws when we should be paying attention to how do we bring more people into the system? How do we simplify this? There are issues about misunderstanding, doubting what you can do, lack of knowledge. We need to be doing everything possible to make the transaction of voting as simple, as trusted, and as possible for as many people as possible. And voter ID laws, all of the attention that is paid to it, that's about voter suppression. This is an opportunity to say we have a serious issue that is stopping people from voting. What can we do about it? And New York, as a leader, can take that role.
You know, you do have a point about, we don't know how many actually did show up. You're right, I stand corrected. 125,000 names were purged. But Gianno, I mean, New York State, it's got one of the most liberal ways to vote. You don't have to show an ID. You don't have to prove anything, basically, after you've already registered. You just show up, and they have this big, gigantic pad that has your signature on it. And people have complained, well, you can just walk up, say your name, and, fake the signature. But the broader issue is, how do you fix the voting system that, according to Senator Sanders and others, just blocked out a whole ream of voters from being able to participate today because it's a closed primary?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is the question, and I must say that it is shameful that the Democrats and the folks in the city of New York has disenfranchised voters who mainly would have supported, in my opinion, Bernie Sanders. You're talking about 125,000 voters that were purged from the rolls in places like Brooklyn, which is where Senator Sanders is from. Additionally, I think that is a very well-known fact because people like the mayor of New York, the comptroller who's launched this investigation in New York. Additionally, the New York Attorney General is talking about this issue because we've seen that complaints were high. They were 3 times as high than they were in 2012, and there were a number of folks disenfranchised. So when you get people like Hillary Clinton is always talking about voter disenfranchisement, but yet very silent on this issue that benefited her, I mean, it's just absolutely disgusting. So I just have no idea how the Democrats could not be sounding the alarm on something that disenfranchised many folks who would have supported Bernie Sanders.
Well, Jehmu, that's a kind of a point because others have always said that the reason that you have to register in October in order to be able to vote today, and we know 2 of Donald Trump's children, they weren't able to vote for him because they hadn't changed to a Republican registration. It's all designed, critics say, by Albany, by the state legislature in Albany that has been rife with indictments and convictions of some of the top officials in Albany to keep the power for the incumbency, and it's all one system that has strangled this state. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's very disingenuous to point the finger at Secretary Clinton on this issue. I know that there's no fact out there that these issues benefited Secretary Clinton. I think this is much bigger than New York. It's much bigger than Albany. And this situation in New York today can play a role to allow New York to be a leader in the country on these issues. This is not about voter suppression. This is about how do we make it easier for more people to participate in our democracy.
And I think that they'll do something in New York State about this? You think they really will change?
Well, it's an opportunity. I hope so. I don't think it's going to come by Senator Sanders saying that, yeah, he was wronged and crying over spilt milk in a sense. I think this is a real analysis of how do we allow people to register to vote in this country? Do we make it easier or do we make it harder for you to participate in the democracy? And right now, the answer is we make it harder, whether you're in New York or other states. And all of us, Democrats, Republicans, need to understand we need to make it easier. We want more people participating.
And Gianno,
that's what America is about.
Go ahead. Do you think it'll change?
And I'm going to have to disagree with your statement there. I believe that this did benefit Hillary Clinton, especially considering the fact that Bernie Sanders won just about every county in the state. It was the city in which he was disenfranchised, and this is where the number of issues it had arisen from. So to say that this isn't about voter suppression, I think would be absolutely intellectually dishonest, because it benefited Hillary Clinton. And we saw when he had rallies, he had them at Brooklyn, he had 28,000 people. On the same day, she had about 1,200 people. So you know that the people were ready and fired up to support Bernie Sanders.
Well,
so to say that it's not about suppression is absolutely dishonest, in my opinion.
Well, this is
That's shameful.
Well, this is all going to be investigated. Let me tell you something about the New York City Board of Elections. Part of my investigations here, I caught someone who voted twice illegally in 2012, and they didn't believe it. And it was their own figures at the Board of Elections that showed it to us, and that's one of the reasons they have tons of problems over there that's now being investigated. So, Gianno and Jehmu, thank you. We all want to protect the republic and the democracy and make sure everyone gets to vote. But when there are problems like this, that does cast a pall over what happens sometimes. Thank you.